Hello, I'm Will Sampson. Welcome to the Woodworking Network podcast. Welcome to the Woodworking Network podcast, where we explore the business of woodworking and what it takes to succeed. I'm Will Sampson. This episode is sponsored by Fdmc magazine, and don't forget to take our survey at woodworkingnetwork.com/podcast-survey. Today, we'll be talking with Jeffrey Nichols about preventing fires and explosions from wood dust. But first, I want to provide a personal take and talk about wood dust worries. As woodworkers, most of us think of wood primarily as beautiful and versatile building material. But it can also be a means of destruction. Probably the scariest thing that can happen in a wood shop is a fire or a dust explosion. And unfortunately, such incidents are not as rare as we would like. I heat my home in cold Maine winters with wood heat, so I'm intimately acquainted with wood's fire energy. But throwing a few logs into a sealed wood stove is a lot different than dealing with the potential disaster of a fire raging through a woodworking plant. With wood fuel everywhere, such fires are incredibly hard to control and often lead to total destruction of the business. Wood dust can make things even worse, creating a combustible air-fuel mixture that can become literally explosive. When you turn on a table saw or similar cutting tool, you likely immediately recognize the hazard represented by that spinning, sharp blade. You take appropriate safety measures, such as how you feed the stock, safety guards, push sticks, power feeds, or the like. In my shop, I invested in a saw-stop saw for an extra measure of protection. But when it comes to wood dust, lots of us have been just brushing it aside for years. Oh, maybe we installed some kind of dust collection for an individual machine, or even a comprehensive collection program for the full shop. Still, when it comes to combustible dust, that might not be nearly enough. The only time I came close to experiencing a wood dust fire firsthand was when I was teaching an evening adult ed woodworking class using a middle school shop in Connecticut. The school's wood shop was in need of a lot of maintenance. It had an old 10-inch table saw connected to the central dust collection system by some plastic flex tubing that probably was originally intended as dryer ducting. A spark from the table saw instantly ignited the dust in the plastic duct and melted it. Luckily, the fire didn't go any further than that. No one was hurt. The ducting and rickety old saw were replaced. Still, the experience left a lasting impression, and I know it's usually not that easy to escape the serious consequences of a woodshop fire. Some of us might be tempted to get lazy about prevention and dealing with combustible dust issues, but don't do it. You don't want to be standing outside the shop with the fire department watching your life's work go up in flames. I suppose that means it's time to talk to a real expert. But before we bring Jeff Nichols on, let's pause for a word from our sponsor. Fdmc magazine is your vital source of information to improve your woodworking business. Whether it is keeping you apprised of the latest advances in manufacturing, helping you solve your wood technology problems with Gene Wengert, or inspiring you with case histories about successful businesses and best practices, Fdmc magazine is there to be the sharpest business tool in your shop. Learn more and subscribe for free at woodworkingnetwork.com/FDMC. Woodworking fires and explosions can quite literally destroy a woodworking business. Our guest today is Jeffrey C. Nichols, managing partner at Industrial Fire Prevention, LLC. He has been involved in providing special hazards protection for combustible dust processes and helping to protect production and personnel in woodworking and other process industries since 1979. He's also a technical committee member of the National Fire Protection Association's 664 standard for the prevention of fires and explosions in wood processing and woodworking facilities. And we'll be talking more about the NFPA 664 standard a little later. As I understand it, his particular expertise was in spark detection and related systems, but he's also been involved in other facets of dealing with combustible dust and fire and explosion prevention, consulting and training. Welcome to the Woodworking Network podcast, Jeff.
Thank you, Will. Appreciate it.
How did you get involved in this field of study in the first place?
Well, it's real interesting. I had moved to Oregon about 1978 or 79 and went to work for a sheet metal outfit that was building large dust collection systems for a lot of new woodworking plants at the time. And they had just started importing the Graycon spark detection systems into North America, and I was their second employee they hired for that Graycon division. I was hired basically to sweep up, do inventory, shipping and receiving. At the same time, I was going to night school to become an electronic technician, so eventually became a technician for them, traveling the country in my early 20s as a service technician, field technician. Really, a single guy on a company expense account. It was a great gig. I really loved that job. It was awesome. Eventually, I sold so many spare parts and service contracts and stuff, just trying to support my customers, that they asked me to go into sales and open an office in Atlanta, Georgia. So I did that. That was in the mid 80s, and have been selling spark detection, fire protection, explosion protection systems since then. They were a family run operation. So I couldn't see a lot of upward growth in that company, so I was looking for something else to do on my own. They found out about it and fired me. I went into construction. I worked for a friend who was a builder. We built homes. We did remodels. I went to work for a custom home builder, then a production builder. We were building 3 subdivisions at a time. Then Graycon came to me in the mid 90s and said, "Hey, why don't you come back to work for us? We've opened our own office here, and we'd love to have you on as sales." So I've been part of Graycon's history for quite a while. I've been selling for them directly since the mid 90s, about 95, I think it was.
That's great. Now, I think a lot of woodworking business owners hear about fires or see news about some spectacular combustible dust explosion, but they're in denial that it's a problem in their shop or plant. How serious is this issue?
Oh boy, it's serious. People don't understand how combustible this dust is that they work around every day. Uh, Matter of fact, one of the biggest hurdles to the small businesses I deal with is that, hey, we've been running this way for, years. Why do we need to add this all of a sudden? And usually it's because they've had a series of small fires and a fire marshal wants them to do it, or some other authority having jurisdiction, or typically it's their insurance company. They'll say, "Hey, you need to put a spark detection system in on your dust collector, or we're not going to insure you." So that's usually where the impetus comes from. So then they ask me, "Why do we need this? Why do we even do it?" And so a few years ago, I wrote a book called The Ultimate Guide to Fire and Explosion Prevention that I give to these guys. And basically it's for the frontline worker to explain to them how dangerous this stuff is. They look at a ST1 dust that says weak explosion, but what they don't understand is that a wood dust is, even though it's classified as a weak explosion, it can have up to, 15 or 16 uh, KST, and each one of those is 14 and a half pounds of pressure. So even a weak what is considered a weak explosion compared to some other dust is can still blow your dust collector up, can still blow the walls out of your facility and cause grave injury, put people out of business. And I've seen this a number of times. Companies go out of business after a major explosion like that, especially if they get somebody hurt.
The way it's always been explained to me is that I think is really visual is that when you have air and wood dust traveling in pipes in dust collection system, it's just like fuel and air mixed in a carburetor in a car or something like that, and it's ready to ignite.
That's a great analogy. I've used that myself. The air fuel mixture in a carburetor is compressed in the piston in the chamber, to a point where it causes an explosion and pushes that piston down. That's what drives your internal combustion engine. I've also pointed people to YouTube to look at wood dust explosions, and there's some great ones on there for sawdust cannons, where people will take a 50-gallon drum, fill it with sawdust, and put compressed air to it, blow it up in a dust cloud, and ignite it and create a big explosion.
I have seen a couple of those. It's pretty scary stuff.
It is scary stuff.
Now, you were on the MFPA 664 committee. Can you talk a little bit about that new standard, which I believe takes effect this month? Is that correct?
Well, NFPA 652, 654 was the basic combustible dust standard. It's been supplanted with NFPA 652 a couple years ago that came out that said by 2020, by November, we've got to have our dust hazard analysis done, which is basically an abbreviated hazard analysis or risk analysis. So NFPA 664 is basically the standard for wood processing, but NFPA 652 is the standard for combustible dusts. It will direct you to independent or the individual standards for your specific commodity, and 664 for wood dust. And basically, you're supposed to have a dust hazard analysis completed in your facility by November of this year. And what that means, what a dust hazard analysis is you hire a professional, typically an engineering firm, that will come through and look at all of your ignition hazards, all of your combustible dust hazards, and write a report, give you that report and path forward as to how to address your combustible dust and any ignition hazard that you do have.
Now, I've read some reports on the new standard and heard all the talk about plans and reporting and all that. I know a lot of our audience is small to medium sized operations.
Yeah.
They may have the idea that all of this only applies to big factories. Why should every woodworking manufacturer, regardless of size, pay attention?
Well, any kind of process is going to need some kind of a hazard analysis. So, and OSHA's got a lot of combustible dust standards of their own. So, if somebody were to get hurt from machine guarding or lack of machine guarding or some other incident in your woodworking facility, and an OSHA guy shows up, he's also going to look at your combustible dust issues and say, hey, you've got layers and layers of combustible dust on your machinery, your floors, your walls, your ceilings, your joists, your lighting, your conduit, your ductwork up above, and that is enough to cause a deflagration in this facility. So even the small guys, and this is something I walk through with my customers quite often, point out, look, this is a combustible dust hazard. Here's how you address it. Same thing with the electrical hazards. We kind of look at those things. I do that for my customers as a courtesy. I don't write any reports. I don't do anything. I don't want to be on I'm qualified to do dust hazard analysis, but it's not my specialty and it's not what I want to do. I want to be the guy that supplies them a solution, that has a long-term solution with them. I don't want to be the guy that says, hey, you got this dust hazard problem. You need to add spark detection. And oh, by the way, I want to sell it to you. I just want to keep it an arm's length transaction. I'd rather be on the solution side, but I can refer them to engineers that do that work. Something they need to have proof of in case their insurance wants to see it, in case OSHA wants to see it. They do need to get it done.
Well, I mean, even getting it done, regardless of having those enforcement issues or insurance issues, it would make the management of the plant to be at least self-aware of what their current status and how grave the potential problem is.
Exactly. If you've got a small dust collector at a machine, it's not that big of a fire and explosion hazard. If you've got a fire extinguisher there, it's not a huge deal. But if you've got numerous machinery, you've got a central dust collection system going out to a dust collector, you do have a fire and explosion hazard in that dust collector. And if you're returning the air back into the building, you've got a serious life safety issue as well. So there's a lot of issues and a lot of reasons to get a dust hazard analysis done. And especially if you want to be able to sleep at night and not be woken up, on the weekend when you guys are working and they say, hey, we've got a fire and it's out of control. You need to really be on top of that kind of stuff. And most companies, to be fair, are on top of that. Now, the smaller guys are in a little bit of a pickle because it's going to cost them several $1,000s to get a dust hazard analysis done. There may be some recommendations that they do some upgrades, and so they've got to fit that into their budget and come up with a timeline or a path forward that they can show their insurance company or OSHA or any fire marshal that yeah, we are aware of it. We've got our dust hazard analysis done, and we do have a path forward that we're working towards. So they've got to be able to show some kind of evidence of that.
Right. Well, that makes sense. Yeah. Now, how exactly does spark detection work to prevent explosions and fires? What role does it play in a plant fire protection plan?
Well, this is one of the reasons I love spark detection, because it's a preventative device. Most people understand sprinkler systems. If you get a fire, sprinkler head's going to go off. You're going to get a spot extinguishment at that location. Spark detection and extinguishing systems is one of the hazard monitoring controls that we use in our business. One of the main ones we add infrared spark detection to ductwork, to conveyors. NFPA 664 for wood dust says that any conveyor with a fire hazard needs some kind of spark detection or fire protection on it. It also says that any kind of a vessel with a fire hazard needs fire protection, and any vessel with an explosion hazard needs explosion protection. So we look at all those areas, but spark detection is one of our primary tools for preventing fires. It'll detect sparks coming from machinery in the incipient stage before they get to the dust collector, create a fire, and extinguish them on the run in the background while you're still running production. It'll just detect and extinguish the odd sparks. One of the things I like about the Graycon system that I sell is that it will actually count the number of sparks as well. So all of a sudden, if you've got a dual saw, dual router, you blow a belt on a wide belt sander, all of a sudden you see a shower of sparks. Now you know you've got some kind of hazardous condition that you need to shut down some machinery. And we can interlock all that stuff to shut down stuff automatically. So it's basically a fire prevention tool that we use.
So it's detecting, as you said, it's infrared detecting a spark in the system.
Yeah.
And then what does it do to extinguish it?
So typically in wood products, we'll use water as the extinguishing medium just because it's simple, it's easy. Most people have water and it's cost effective. You can use other extinguishing mediums, gases and CO2 and stuff, but they get really expensive. For woodworking, especially the smaller guys, we find that water and the other reason I use the Graycon system is because we atomize that water into the duct. So we know exactly how much water is going to take to extinguish that spark. So we'll detect it. We'll count the number of sparks. We'll put in enough water to extinguish those sparks. A lot of times we'll add a second detect zone too further downstream if there's room and if there's a budget for it, to redetect anything just before it gets to the collector, so that we know if we've got any ignitable material, any ignition coming into that collector. Then we can activate fire sprinkler system, a deluge system. We can shut off an abort gate to divert any air away from coming back into the plant. So there's a lot of things you can do with spark detection system. That's why I like it as one of my primary tools to prevent fires in these plants.
That's all we have time for today, but we will talk more with Jeff in our next episode about the nitty-gritty of how spark detection works, how systems are installed, what you need to know. You can find all of our podcasts at woodworkingnetwork.com/podcasts and in popular podcast channels. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Thanks again to today's sponsor, Fdmc Magazine, and a special thanks to Joshua Manga at Fagus Graycon for suggesting that we talk to Jeff. If you have a comment or topic you'd like us to explore, contact me at will.sampson@woodworkingnetwork.com. And we would really appreciate it if you fill out the survey at woodworkingnetwork.com/podcast-survey. Thanks for listening.